All right. It's another Thursday afternoon in coronavirus land.
Yeah,
Hopefully, everybody is well and truly bunkered and hunkered down and riding out this storm of this bug and staying healthy. I know, well, obviously, not everybody is, but if you're listening to this show, you're under our protection.
absolutely. I read earlier in a interesting headline that Johnson and Johnson is supposed to have about 600 million vaccines for it by 2021. They're saying,
Wow.
yeah, this is a great thing. So,
So
see some good
it
news.
will be interesting to see how the anti-vaxxers react to that,
Yeah, yeah,
since it's
yeah,
a lot less theoretical.
yeah. It definitely is. Hey man, that rabbit hole is that's something I don't want to go down ever again.
Yeah.
But um yeah. Yeah,
So,
it's interesting because it kind of parallels what we'll be getting into after the news here in the intro because the last major pandemic in this country was right before Prohibition, the Spanish flu in 1918.
yes. Yeah,
Um,
that's true. Uh,
And interestingly, the WHO is actually talking about potentially banning booze in
why?
Europe right now. I guess they were saying that it doesn't help the coronavirus, which sure it doesn't. It
Oh, that's
sucks
not who
nutrients.
said it would?
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't, it sucks nutrients
Ne
out of your body, so whatever. But
You know
they're
what?
also
Chocolate doesn't prevent the virus or help you either.
no,
So
no,
what the hell?
exactly. Yeah, so let's ban that too. But they were also trying to say that, well, it encourages domestic violence.
Oh man,
Yeah,
that's the same arguments from the prohibition.
right. I mean, it does, I think, in certain instances, but if you look at the actual science there isn't any.
Right.
There is no scientific link between it. So,
Well, why not ban video games? It has just as much of a correlation.
yeah,
Video games
exactly.
and violence, or violent movies and actual violence. There's lots of similar type of claims that are completely without merit.
Yeah. Well, and to them, with all of that, I would say the best of luck taking booze out of the hands of cultures like the German one and the Irish one.
And the Italians and the
Yeah,
French
yeah,
and
exactly.
and
Yeah, basically the entire continent.
right, and the islands.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just, I don't know, it's just so absurd
Well, I
reading these
mean,
headlines.
and and what happened last time we did prohibition? It was a
Yeah,
major contributor to
crime.
crime, the depression. Um, people did not stop drinking. We covered this last week.
Yeah, it,
People are going to drink.
yeah. I mean, exactly. And we'll be getting into a bit more of that when we get into the meat of this. We did have some news first,
All
though.
right, let's do that. This week in crime history. Well, it's not really history. It's
Yeah.
it's
I mean, this is like last week. But a little bit of non corona related New York true crime news. There was a guy who apparently met his girlfriend's baby daddy when he was out on the street and got stabbed. That one made the news. The second one was, yeah, it's kind of weird. Happened about an hour west of me in Kirksville, Missouri. And I'll just read the headline to start. Ah, damn it, the stupid freaking ads. Okay. The headline: Naked Kirksville woman caught eating dog treats in van at animal shelter.
What do you mean by
this
caught? Why would?
this woman was not mentally ill, by the way.
But what was her crime?
A naked woman
Oh, she was
was
naked, but
found.
she was in her van.
A naked woman was found this week eating dog treats in a van at the Adair County, Missouri Humane Society, just west of Kirksville. An animal shelter employee discovered the woman in the back of the Humane Society's van just before 9:30 a.m. Monday. Kirksville police told KTVO the 27-year-old Kirksville woman was found nude, wrapped in a feces-covered blanket that was in the van. She had multiple individually wrapped dog snacks and told authorities she had spent the night in the vehicle. She got in through the van's unlocked sliding door.
Oh, it
Uh, de-
wasn't her van. Oh,
no,
oh, so there you go.
no.
That's a key piece I was missing.
Yeah, it's the Humane Society's van.
Is it
Uh,
if you're in a vehicle, does that count as being in public?
uh, I would think so. Uh, Deputy Police Chief Justin Jones said the woman, who was under the influence of narcotics, was taken into protective custody and turned over to her family. Possible charges include trespassing and property damage.
Hmm.
So,
So
yeah, because
here's a little bit of dog treat, dog food trivia, pet food trivia. Do you know how they taste test animal food?
I haven't the slightest
They
idea.
have people do it.
Really?
Yeah, just like Oreo cookies.
Wow.
Milk Bones have human taste testers
Huh.
and all of their foods.
That,
But it's
that's
true.
different. It's
That's
different. One
that's
with.
somebody's job.
Wow.
And
Interesting.
and and a good taste tester can tell not only and this is true of any whatever they specialize in. They can tell you not only which plant the food came from, but which batch it came out of in a particular plant.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Interesting.
it's
That's some pretty sharp taste buds.
no kidding.
Oh, yeah, this headline. Czech nudists told by police to wear masks.
Uh,
Oh, man.
safe sex
Uh,
suddenly has a whole new meaning.
oh, apparently. Let's see. There was a prison riot at the facility in Lansing, Kansas, where a group of inmates took over a cell block and began destroying property. Apparently, they were pissed because coronavirus is going through that place like, hell. But,
We had a local mini uprising or threat of uprising at a local prison along the same lines.
oh,
They
wow.
shut it down pretty quick, um,
Wow.
but there
Man.
was, you know, th- th- there were more cases reported. Not a huge number, but they were worried about the increase.
Huh, interesting. It's kind of like man, it's just causing people to act crazy. That guy in Florida is actually arrested for threatening to shoot up a Publix because people were not wearing masks to his liking.
Mm.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, hey, here's the thing, people. Stop worrying about what everybody else is doing. This
Oh,
is a
yeah.
general rule for a happier life. Just
Yeah.
just lay off, man. Just back up, chill out. Nobody's going to do things the way you think they should do it. It's just how
Yeah.
life works.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And then you have this case out of Brooklyn with this fellow. He was a bodega owner, apparently very well liked in his community. I guess his son stabbed him and took his entrails. The police couldn't find it. They're treating it as cannibalism. They think
Ooh,
he ate him.
didn't try and sell them in the deli.
No,
Yeah, well, that's
no,
good.
but yeah, this the accused apparently has quite the history of mental illness, so he's at Bellevue right now for a psychological workup in New York. And then, oh yeah, Florida woman was apparently depositing eggs in her neighbors' mailboxes that had tiny pornographic images in them on
Inside of
Easter.
them?
Yeah, yeah. The Florida woman Easter porn hunt.
Wow.
So yeah. Oh, and to
Just, just,
sort of
just,
lead.
just to reinforce the fact that women are just as crazy as men.
Oh yeah, especially in Florida.
Yeah.
But oh yeah, and then the last one, another one that just happened today, and it kind of leads in quite finely to what we'll be talking about, is the two prominent Chicago attorneys found stabbed to death in their home. Um,
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to read up on that. What's the story there?
I mean, I don't know if it is organized crime related. There's obviously not still, the Capone gang or the Italian mob up there, but there is still plenty of organized crime operating in that city.
And even more
Uh,
disorganized crime.
oh yeah, absolutely. Um, but yeah, we'll definitely be sure to keep people updated on that as they get more info. Right now, there's not a whole lot. They're just saying it was a double homicide in their home by knife.
Hmm.
So, yeah,
Yeah, that's definitely sounds like the kind of case where there's more going on than what it seems.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I, it would be smart, of course, to start with something like that with any possible domestic squabbles, but then from there, I would think the next natural outgrowth of that would be looking at their client list and their enemy list for possible
Right.
motives. So,
Absolutely true. All right. I'm going to throw the warning up at everybody here because we're going to show dead bodies today.
yep,
Um, because guess what? Mobsters and gangsters, one of their defining qualities is killing people.
yes. I mean,
Violence is not their product, but it's certainly a it's how they keep their power and money.
oh yeah. I mean, murder in large part was their business, but it's not on the same level as the sex killers,
Right.
no doubt about it. But um, yeah, I thought we might start if we have some of those pictures by the great photographer Ouija.
Well, let's show his a picture of the guy taking the pictures.
There we go.
That'll be
He
popping up any
was
second now.
he has a really interesting history. He was actually born in the Ukraine in 1899. He was born. I'm trying to figure out how to say that. Oh, Usher. And when they came to Manhattan in 1918 with his family, they changed his name to Arthur Fellig because they thought it sounded more American.
Ah,
Uh, and he started actually getting some basic employment at a photography studio that year. And that job, usually doing squeegee work in photo development,
oh, okay.
is one way that they say he got the name Ouija. But there is another one that's probably a little bit more pertinent, as we'll see from these pictures that he takes.
I'm gonna
He
show
was
show his logo here.
sure.
Yeah, so he was known as Ouija.
Yep.
Not Ouija like the Ouija board.
Well, actually, that's the other theory about it.
Really? I mean, it's
He
spelled
was,
differently.
it's spelled out phonetically,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, but yeah, that was another theory about it. In 1935 is when he started basically covering the crime beat in Lower Manhattan as a freelancer, or what would later be known as a night crawler in journalism.
Ah,
And
before
that's where he took
before
so
film.
many. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, just like the movie with Jake Gyllenhaal. Although that one is fictionalized, but
Which, by
as
the
we'll.
way, because we love talking film, um,
Mm-hmm.
I found the portrayal of the Jake Gyllenhaal character to be one of the most accurate depictions of a sociopath that you will ever find in film.
Oh, I
Um,
couldn't agree more with that. He actually modeled that character, no kidding, after a coyote, a
oh,
literal coyote,
how about
and
that?
he did that by fasting and then like running or biking every day to the film set to make himself look gaunt the way that he did in that movie.
Yeah, and they have a scene in there where he practices reacting, you know, to different scenarios,
Mm-hmm.
because that's one of the things about sociopaths is they don't have an automatic emotional response to situations. Um,
Yeah,
and so it shows him practicing how to have an emotional response to a situation, and it's fabulously done.
absolutely. They have to, mimic and shape that and
Yeah,
think about it,
yeah.
how they're going to react. But yeah, the other way that Ouija got his name was from the Ouija board. In so many instances, when he started up in 1935, he saved up enough money to buy a car, the 4x5 plate camera that you saw him with in his
Yeah,
picture,
yeah.
and then flash bulbs for it, and a police radio.
Ah.
He was he was the first night
Oh.
crawler to use a police radio.
And people thought he was using black magic to show up at the crime scenes before everybody else.
Well,
Was
that
that
was
it?
part of it. Well, and I think that he kind of nurtured that too,
Sure.
that whole idea that, hey, I'm psychic. I know where these crime scenes are going to be before you are. But the other thing with that was he knew so many of these people in Lower Manhattan. He made friends with the down and out. He made friends with the winos and the hobos and the prostitutes and the bartenders and the hitmen and just see all of them. So he had intelligence everywhere that could let him know.
Oh, well, that's just smart business, right?
Oh yeah. And I personally, I think that his photos are spectacular too. He's actually one of the main influences on my photographic work. When
Oh,
I
that's cool.
first started was studying Ouija, and his technique was street photography. Um, and if we have the particular one in there, it's called Balcony Seats at a Murder.
Yeah, I'll pull that up. I do have that one available.
We can show a bit of that and how he would react to this stuff. Um,
Yeah, that's a really cool shot.
another interesting thing with him with many of these scenes when he would get there, he was also known to move stuff, to pose it, literally.
Oh man, that just makes me just cringe at the thought.
Yeah. Oh,
But
absolutely.
crime scene investigation of the day
Yeah,
was, pretty loosey goosey.
pretty much. Yeah, in the 30s. But yeah, that is the scene, balcony seats at a murder. And what he wanted to focus on was the people's reactions in the windows
Hmm.
above it. And a lot of the stringer photographers, the night crawlers at this time, the freelancers, would have focused way in on that body. But
Right.
Ouija, in his self taught genius, decided, you know what? I'm going to back up. I want to see this whole scene. I want to get a a better view of it, a wider view of it, and the social view of it. And it's really what informed street photography as it grew as a genre. And it also really informed the look of film noir when it came out
Oh yeah,
in the 40s.
sure, sure. It does have this same kind of look.
Hmm.
Uh,
In fact, Ouija wrote a book in 1947 called Night in the City that was made into a movie by the same name that really sort of solidified that look. But
yeah,
yeah, I think,
and a lot of people tend to think that noir was filmed in black and white because there wasn't color film, but that's not true at all. Color film had been around a long time.
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, since at least the 30s, you had so
Yeah.
many of those out in color. Um, yeah, so much of it was that aesthetic. Although there were a lot of budgetary concerns with a lot of them too, and that also helped with that, and it also helped to hide mistakes because often they would do things
Oh
like
yeah.
reuse sets
True.
between the especially the B pictures
Well,
as they
and
came
and
out.
then you could get away with doing some things in black and white that would be a lot trickier in color, like in Psycho, where Hitchcock used Hershey syrup for the blood in the shower.
Yep, yep, that was a big thing, especially with Psycho. Hitch was really afraid of the blood, the overall bloodiness, if he would have shot that in color. Uh, yeah, and getting back to the main subject right there with all of that, one of the biggest mobsters that Ouija knew and really exploited the relationship with was Charles Lucky Luciano of New
Ah, yeah.
York. And he knew him personally. And he's really um, generally regarded as the most important figure in the development of organized crime in this country, even more important than Capone.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
real,
Capone was just a thug, really, and he wasn't
yeah,
very bright. I
yeah. I
mean,
mean,
he was kind of a moron, literally, and diseased moron at that.
yeah, yeah, syphilis,
Yeah.
which ultimately killed him. But yeah, I mean, it was Luciano who started most of that in New York and really brought it to the power that we know from looking at history right now. But he was, as my crime encyclopedia describes it, the guiding genius, along with Meyer Lansky, who we talked a bit about. The
Hmm.
mob's accountant
Right.
was, was Meyer. Um, and a lot of it was, a campaign of double dealing and where necessary hits, like we're seeing in a lot of this photography. Um, and he cleansed a lot of the old world Italian mobsters through all of that. Um,
Yeah, it's interesting how we today view the Italian mob through the lens of The Godfather.
Mm-hmm.
And, I read that book. It was not that great of a book, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's not
It's not that,
anything spectacular.
no, it really isn't. The movie is so much better than the book, which you don't get to say very often. Um,
Yeah.
Coppola sat down with Mario Puzo when he was working on the film and the script, and they just started trying to figure out, without firsthand knowledge of how crime families live day to day. So how do we show their day-to-day lives? And they said, well, they're just Italian families. Let's just show what Italian New York families were like, and that's what they did.
Yeah. I mean, essentially. I mean, although, of course, this in Sicily, La Cosa Nostra was very much a thing.
Oh,
And,
absolutely.
yeah, and very brutal throughout much of that time. Which it's interesting
Well,
because Luciano actually wasn't born in New
if
York.
if
He was
by
born in
throughout
Palermo.
if by throughout that time you mean still today,
Yeah. Yeah, this is true. This is very true. But yeah, he was born in 1897. He came to New York in 1906.
hmm
At the age of 9, he was arrested for shoplifting, his very first
wow,
criminal offense. And actually, at 10, he started a racket that would later produce millions of dollars for him. For a penny or two a day, he offered younger and smaller Jewish kids his personal protection against beatings on the way to school. So, um,
sorry, I
yeah.
had to sneeze. See, so much tree pollen.
Oh man, that sucks.
Oh man.
But
So he
uh,
started a protection racket as a teenager?
yeah, literally, when he was 10, he started
Oh
it.
my, before he must have been a big kid.
That's a good question. I didn't see what his vital statistics were, but I mean, of course, with that, he would slug the ones who would not pay.
Right.
Um, and actually, one of those kids who would not pay was Meyer Lansky, a youngster from Poland. Um, at first, the two fought, and then they became friends, and that relationship continued as we were talking about. Um, by 1916, Luciano was a full-fledged member of the Five Points gang, which Capone was also a member of.
Ah.
I think at the same time too.
Yeah, I believe they were contemporaries. Yeah.
Hmm.
And then
Uh,
of course Capone moved to I I say moved to Chicago, but I think he was kind of banished.
yeah, I mean, essentially, he was in a lot of ways a loose cannon,
Yes.
as we will definitely see. But yeah, throughout the more early years with Luciano, he developed a hatred for what was called the Mustache Pete's. These were the old timers that we were talking about who ruled the Italian mafia. And by the 20s, he was plotting their elimination. Um, and at that time, Luciano was already important in the underworld, a power in bootlegging rackets in cooperation with Lansky again and his erstwhile partner, Bugsy Siegel.
Bugsy.
Yep, one of the later gangsters, which Siegel was actually more known as a hitman throughout his career. But there was also some other figures you might know in there.
Oh,
Joe Adonis, Vito Genovese,
oh
and
yeah.
especially Frank Costello. Um, Costello was the one who put him in contact with other ethnic gangsters, which was much to the displeasure of the Mustache Pete's. These were Irishmen like Big Bill Dwyer and other Jews like Arnold Rothstein, who we talked about last week,
hmm
and also Dutch Schultz, who his picture of when he had a bullet in his gut and ultimately died 3 days later is floating around in our slideshow. I'll point him out when I see it.
Oh, is that the one when he's laying on the table on the back with his?
Yep,
Okay.
that is Dutch. And interestingly about him, Dutch was kind of a paranoid guy. And I don't know how many people have heard about it, but supposedly he buried a rather substantial fortune in upstate New York that I don't believe anybody's ever found.
Is that fairly reliably known? I mean, is that a real thing, or is it like Captain Kidd's treasure?
Oh, this one is, I mean, it's fairly reliable. I don't, the size might be smaller than what the myths say. It probably is, in fact,
Sure.
but yeah, the sources I was looking at said it was pretty reliable. Although, like I said, nobody's ever found it either. Um, but yeah, by the late 1920s, Lucky Luciano had risen to the number 2 position in the family of Giuseppe, Joe the Boss Masseria, the top Italian gangster at that time. And he detested him, really. And that was, again, the old world ways, which he thought were crippling their cash flow and their business. You know, it's really amazing the business acumen that these guys had when you
Yeah,
look at.
yeah. I mean, you know, they would they would resort to force to get their way, but they didn't want to do it that way.
No, no, I mean,
That was
they
not the
would.
preferred option.
Exactly. It was bad for business once you get down to it.
Or
I
as
mean,
as
even
they say
still,
as they say in The Godfather, blood is a big expense.
yeah, exactly. I mean, that's even still true when you look at these mobsters from today. These, people who are getting locked up for medium to larger size, let's say, drug dealing. They have some pretty smart business acumen about them.
Hmm.
And it's why business schooling actually goes a long way with inmates. And a lot of those people get their degrees when they're behind bars. Um,
Not
but
all
yeah,
lawyers, huh?
nope,
A,
nope. I
a
think they
lot of
wanted to
inmates
actually
study the
produce
law
something.
inside, but business would probably pay off better.
Oh yeah, and absolutely. But yeah, in 1928, the Castellammarese War broke out between the forces of Joe the Boss, who we were talking about, and those of the second most powerful mafioso head in New York, Salvatore Maranzano. And over the next 2 years, dozens on both sides were killed. These were, you getting into the Tommy gun turf disputes for the most part.
Hmm.
Um, Luciano, meanwhile, was cementing relationships with the younger second line leadership within the Maranzano camp, and it soon became clear that both groups were merely waiting to see which of the two leaders would die first so they could make plans to get rid of the other. Um, when after a time neither had been assassinated, Luciano took matters into his own hands. 3 of his men and Bugsy Siegel on loan from Meyer Lansky drove the boss to death in a Coney Island restaurant after Luciano had stepped into the men's room.
Oh,
Luciano,
that
yeah,
sounds very familiar.
yep. Luciano then became number 2 under a seemingly grateful Maranzano who proclaimed himself the quote boss of bosses of New York. But Maranzano intended to make himself the supreme boss of the entire United States Mafia, and to that end, drew up a death list of those who would have to be eliminated because they stood in his way. The top name on that list in Chicago? Al Capone.
Mm. So he was on the hit list.
Oh, yeah. He was on quite a few lists. I'm wondering. I'm wondering
Well,
if that
yeah,
would be a good.
they didn't really like him. Yeah,
Oh
like you
no,
say, he was a loose cannon. He was irrational, and he would, he couldn't depend. He was independent. You couldn't depend on him. Well,
no.
You
Well,
know.
no, but what's interesting about that, though, before the St. Valentine's Day massacre
Yeah.
in 1929, Capone was actually viewed as a Robin Hood by a lot of people.
Oh.
And that's because he gave a shitload of money to charity around Chicago, throughout Illinois, and like even the story I told about my grandfather and his friends and the silver dollars, that could be another example.
Right.
Um, but yeah, a lot of people, viewed him that way up until 1929 when that happened, and that was 7 of his rival Bugs Moran's men lined up inside a Chicago garage and shot to death.
With Tommy guns.
Actually, the New York Times reported in there that it was a sawed off double barrel
Oh.
that did most of it, and then a revolver.
Ah, that's not as fun.
But there was 4 shooters in total for the St. Valentine's Day massacre. 2 of them were dressed as cops, and one of the cops had a Tommy gun,
Okay.
and then the others had their sawed-offs and then pistols. But um,
And that's how they used the police ruse to get him into the garage, right?
yes, that was a big part of it. Which Moran threw out a lot of that. It was the Chicago beer wars that were happening. They were both trying to get a control of particularly the beer trade up there. And that is pretty much what solidified it. But then it also solidified, like I said, that image of Capone as the loose cannon, or as they often labeled him, public enemy number one after this. That wasn't just John Dillinger.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting about Capone? Did you know his brother was a prohibition agent?
No,
Yeah, no kidding.
I did not know that. I didn't even
uh,
know he had a brother.
yep. I was just going to bring that one up. I have it here. Oh yeah. While his younger brother Al built a criminal empire based on illegal liquor in Chicago in the 1920s, James Vincenzo Capone enforced prohibition laws for the Federal Indian Affairs Administration on reservations of the Winnebago and Omaha tribes in Nebraska. Um,
How about that?
Vincenzo, yeah. Vincenzo, the eldest of the 6 Capone brothers, had changed his name to Richard Joseph Hart to hide his identity, and in,
Oh, yeah.
and in tribute to the silent movie cowboy William S. Hart. After a stint in the circus, Vincenzo settled in the small town of Homer, Nebraska. He served as Homer's town marshal, wore Western-style garb, a hat, and a pair of 6 guns that garnered him the nickname of Two Gun Hart. With Indian Affairs in 1922, he was a special officer assigned to investigate bootlegging. While in Sioux City, Iowa, he killed a suspected bootlegger. He was charged with manslaughter, but beat the rap. Later, while on another term as Marshal of Homer, he lost his badge on suspicion of theft. He reunited with the Capone family in 1940, met his ailing brother Al in Miami, and started receiving financial aid from them, ultimately dying in 1952.
Interesting.
Yeah. Um, oh, and I was going to get into this before we started. My bad.
I was just thinking, how handy it would have been to for somebody like Capone or Luciano to have a have people working who were prohibition agents who could um, confiscate booze from their rivals and give it to them.
Hmm. Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, most of the
They would
time, if I'm
never have
not
thought of
mistaken,
that.
they'd rob it. Yeah. I'm not sure how often just straight up giving it happened, but I know that it quite often happened where they robbed it,
Right.
uh, those liquor stores. But yeah, I was going to get into this actually before we got into this other stuff. Just a couple of things about speakeasies
Okay.
that I came across. The term speakeasy actually did not originate during Prohibition.
Oh.
It came from the two-word phrase speak easy, coined by American journalist Samuel Hudson back in 1889. Um, Hudson, in his 1909 book Pennsylvania and Its Public Men, recalled that while in Pittsburgh in 1889, a new city liquor licensing law reduced the number of taverns there to only 96. That encouraged a rise in illegal bars all over town. Hudson asked Tim O'Leary, a local Democratic Party politician, to show him one. O'Leary explained that an elderly Irish widow who sold illegal beer and whiskey once warned her patrons in her brogue to "spake aisy now, the police are at the door." Sorry, I do a shitty Irish accent.
It's okay.
But, so Hudson said, "speak aisy," ASY, became the moniker for the hundreds of unlicensed taverns in Pittsburgh. When Hudson returned home to Philadelphia, he wrote a column about the speakeasy in the daily newspaper. The item, quote, "It is I who brought to Philadelphia and popularized the term speakeasy as applied to illicit liquor joints." Hudson boasted in his book published 11 years before Prohibition. The term had an instantaneous success, being taken up by the public and police, and it has been in universal use ever since.
Well, that's fascinating. That's cool to know where that came from.
Yeah, from the Mob Museum, actually. This other fact was one that I had known, but I had forgotten about until I read it directly on here again. Speakeasies often were located behind doors painted green.
Ah.
Um, During Prohibition, chances were that a door painted green made it mean it fronted a speakeasy. And like I said last week, technically a speakeasy has to have a false front business about it too. Um, in Chicago, that tradition lives on with two of the town's well-known bars dating from the 20s. The Green Door Tavern on North Orleans Street is an Irish pub that opened in 1921. A bar called The Drifter, also a former Prohibition speakeasy, is tucked away in the Green Door's basement. On North
S- yeah, Seattle has a bar called the Green Door as well.
Oh, there you go. Probably from the same time, I'd bet.
Quite possible.
Um, yeah. There's another one too on North Broadway, the famed Green Mill Cocktail Lounge. That was a speakeasy part owned by Machine Gun Jack McGurn of Capone's outfit. And a interesting tie-in with the green here too.
Yeah.
Congress, this shouldn't surprise anybody, had its own had its own bootlegger known as the Man in the Green Hat.
Really?
Uh, Members of Congress who wanted alcohol during Prohibition could turn to Capitol Hill's top bootlegger, George L. Cassidy. Cassidy walked through the halls of Congress, making up to 25 deliveries of illegal booze a day, while
Wow.
Capitol Police allowed him in at all hours. Over 5 years, he supplied bottles of whiskey, moonshine, scotch, bourbon, and gin from a sturdy leather briefcase. His politician friends got him a room to work out of in the House office building. Uh,
This tells you everything you need to know about Congress.
Basically, in 1925, when he was arrested while ferreting 6 quarts of whiskey to a House member, he had on a light green hat. And from press accounts, the man in the green hat stuck. Cassidy pled guilty and simply switched to selling in the Senate office building. Um,
Jesus.
his his infamy spread to the office of Vice President Charles Curtis, who set up a sting operation in 1930 with a Prohibition agent Dry Spy watching Cassidy from the Senate stationery store. Cassidy was arrested with 6 bottles of gin in his client list, which was never published, of course.
Right.
He was sentenced to a year in prison, and he later wrote that he helped 80% of Congress violate prohibition laws.
Yeah, that's probably lowballing the number.
No doubt about it. No
Either
doubt
that
at
or the other
all.
20% had a different supplier.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm sure they let others in there too. But man. Oh, and did you know that the Prohibition Party still exists? Not even kidding.
What?
Yeah, they are still around, although basically, of course, irrelevant. Among the early organizations to support prohibiting alcohol in the United States was the Prohibition Party, formed in 1869 with the intent to elect politicians opposed to alcoholic beverages. The party remains America's oldest third party. It was the first political party to permit women as members. Thomas Nast, the famed cartoonist for Harper's Weekly, in the late 1800s, had created the elephant to symbolize the Republican Party, and the donkey for Democrats, settled on the camel for the Prohibition Party, since that animal drinks only water. Uh, the Prohibition Party is today little more than a curiosity with very little support left. Its platform remains opposed to alcohol as well as tobacco. Its candidate for president of the United States in 2012 garnered just 519 votes nationwide.
Oh, that's that's actually more than I would think.
Yeah, in 2016, the party nominated James Hedges of Iowa for president and Bill Bays of New York for vice president.
Did they know they were nominated?
Probably not.
Just saying.
Man. And I respect the whole women's rights thing, but the rest of that is just, oh my God. Man.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
astonishing.
yeah, that's a pretty fascinating sight.
I am not a fan of imposing your moral code on other people.
Nor am I.
You can,
Solidly.
you know what? Be opposed to alcohol. I don't care. Just don't try and make other people have to abide by your morality.
Yeah. I don't know why
If
that's
you
so
can
hard for some people to get.
convince people all you like, just don't make a law about it. The government is just shitty at imposing morality.
Yep. They are, man. They are just horrible. But
It's not a good look and it doesn't work.
nope, not at all. Luckily, we are slowly learning that lesson on marijuana.
Yeah.
But it's a step forward, but we need to do a lot more, in my opinion. Um, but yeah, a bit about Capone. Um, Getting back into it, born in Brooklyn in 1889, sixth grade education. He actually dropped out after beating a teacher and then getting beaten by a principal.
Oh.
Um, Started hanging out with the James Street Gang and Johnny Torrio.
And my
If there's
understanding his mother was a prostitute.
She was, and then his father owned a barber shop, actually.
Oh,
Yeah. Um, which Torrio, I don't know if anybody listening,
there's gotta be a dirty joke in there somewhere.
well, probably
Cutting a curl or
somewhere.
something. I don't know what it would be.
But yeah, Torrio for I don't know if anybody listening watches Boardwalk Empire or has seen it, but he's a pretty prominent character there.
Yeah.
Torrio actually set the stage for Capone in Chicago for a lot of that. Um, he was kind of, his mentor and the boss before him. But yeah, he eventually graduated to the Five Points Gang while still in Brooklyn. And Luciano was, as we said, a close friend. Then Torrio actually hired him as a bouncer in a Brooklyn cat house. Um, he had the way that he got the Scarface being his acronym. Yes, he is the
Yeah.
real Scarface.
Right.
He had an altercation with a hood named Frank Galuccio over a woman when Galuccio pulled a knife and slashed his left cheek.
Ah.
Capone, being the grandiose liar that he was, would claim that he got the scar serving in France with the last battalion during World War One. Through much of that, which he was never in the army, by the way.
Right.
So, but yeah, in 1920, Capone follows Torrio to Chicago to help Torrio's uncle, mobster Big Jim Colosimo. His big thing there was especially the dollars in the whorehouses at the time. Colosimo was not too keen on the liquor trade for quite some time. And that is actually why Torrio decided that he had to be rubbed out.
Really.
Uh, yeah. So he and Capone plotted his murder and imported actually New York City talent to do it. That was a guy from the O'Banion gang, Jaime Weiss and Peter Gusenberg, who did that. And they were actually, they hooked up with George Bugs Moran's men after this,
Okay.
because this is before the wars. Yeah. Um, but after this, he begins taking over, slowly but surely, the competition through force and threat. And those who didn't bow down were killed. His biggest coup there was in 1924 with, again, Dion O'Banion, the Irish North Side Gang in Chicago. He was killed by Frankie Yale, who was actually the guy who pulled the trigger on Colosimo, along with those others. Um,
You know,
and then,
uh,
mm-hmm.
sorry to interrupt, but
Oh no,
I don't.
not at all. Go ahead.
I'm watching these pictures go by of, a lot of them are dead bodies. Not all of them, obviously. Some are, but and I can't help but I'm just kind of overwhelmed by the irony of, the prohibition movement, which was largely defined by, alcohol causes violence.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so they decide to outlaw alcohol, and what did they get?
Our kids
Violence.
get yeah. Our kids getting mown down with Tommy guns in the streets.
Yes.
Absolutely. But yeah, that's a huge hypocrisy throughout all this. But with that whole war with Dion O'Banion, that got really bad, and Torrio actually got shot, almost gravely through that.
Hmm.
And he decided, I guess it scared him or rattled him or something. He decided to return to Brooklyn with about $30 million.
Whoa.
So, yeah. And he said to Al after that, quote, Al, it's all yours. Capone's weekly payout for his crew during this weekly $300,000
He
at
paid to
that
his
time.
crew?
Yeah,
Wow.
that's how big it was at the time. And I'm gonna have to bring up another.
Remember, people, a loaf of bread cost a nickel. Gasoline was like 10 cents a gallon.
Yeah,
The average, wage earner, like say an unskilled laborer would make $1 a week.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. Let's say I'm bringing up an inflation calculator while we're talking here. 1925 to 2020, $300,000. Calculate. That is about $4.424 million a week.
A week.
Yeah, but throughout this, Capone demonstrated he could work with other ethnicities too to consolidate his power, basically. And one interesting thing about him, unlike the old school Italians that we were talking about with Luciano,
Yeah.
Capone appreciated and hired all regardless of race. If they showed a talent for what he wanted, he would hire them, basically. And that may
Well,
be part of what contributed to that Robin Hood sort of image
yeah, that
that he had.
true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And he
obviously
was.
he was generous with it with his own people at the
Oh,
very
yeah.
least, right? Because
Oh,
that's a
yeah.
lot of cash he's handing out every week.
Absolutely. And I mean, he gave a shit ton to charities like soup kitchens all over, too. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't whitewash what he did
No.
as far as this stuff, but it just goes to show you.
Well,
Um,
and it's way out of scale for just being for PR. He obviously, had some aspect that he actually did want to help people.
mhm. I
Um,
think so too. Yeah, I definitely think so too. But throughout that, he also surrounded himself with a lot of trustworthy people, and that in turn inspired trust. And
yeah,
get this, he even hired Frank Galuccio as a bodyguard.
really.
Yeah, later on, he hired him. But nevertheless, he faced many assassination attempts from his rivals. Probably the most famous one was poisoning his soup, which he got out of. Um, and in 1926, the O'Banion gang sent an entire convoy, literally a convoy of cars armed with Tommy guns, to Capone's headquarters in Cicero, Illinois, which is just it's south side of Chicago.
Okay.
They emptied 1,000 rounds into that place, but Capone escaped.
Wow.
Yeah. Um,
Well,
and
no wonder the feds were frustrated and decided to go after him on tax evasion. Um,
mhm.
because the guy seemed like he was the untouchable one.
Yeah.
Like
Oh,
they just couldn't catch him at anything,
oh yeah.
and his rivals
That
couldn't kill him.
that reminds me. There was an interesting story somewhere in there about a man. I thought I wrote that down. The details of it. Oh crap! I skipped it over. There was a the mayor of Cicero. This goes to show that untouchable thing. The mayor of Cicero once went against Capone. Capone literally caught him on the steps of the city hall
Yeah,
and beat him to a pulp.
in public.
Yeah, in public.
Well, yeah, when the cops are on your payroll, what are you gonna do? You do whatever you want, right?
Yeah, basically. when you have that huge of a payroll. And remember, he's still expanding throughout this too. Um, let's see, it was soon after that you had a guy by the name of Hop Toad Giunta. And yeah, you gotta love these 1920s, 30s names. But and two other of Capone's most competent killers were showing signs of going independent when he invited them to a banquet in their honor and bludgeoned both to death with an Indian club.
Whoa.
Yeah. Um, and it was around this time we're leading up again to 1929 when he was beginning to look invincible and he erred in ordering the St. Valentine's Day Massacre to kill the last of O'Banion's and Bugs Moran's guys.
And why was
S-
that a mistake?
that was a mistake in large part because of his public image being
Oh,
turned around.
okay. Right, right. You
They,
mentioned that.
they never had enough forensic evidence to tie him to that in any conclusive way.
Right.
But but still, it's the case of everybody knows he ordered it.
Right. There's
Um,
what you know and what you can prove.
right. And that's ultimately where they got him on tax evasion. Nailed on tax evasion, spent 11 years at Atlanta. Um, transferred to Alcatraz in 1934, and he was released because of his syphilis in 1939. Retired to Miami in 47, and he wavered basically between lucidity and all out crazy up until February 25th when he died.
Yes, untreated syphilis pretty much turns your brain to jello.
Yeah, essentially.
Um,
But
yeah,
the
one of the things
estimates,
people need to understand is the federal income tax was a pretty new thing in those days.
yeah,
And
only
people,
about 20 years old
and
at
not
that time.
everybody, most people didn't have to pay anything into it.
Oh, no.
Um,
No.
and so it was not uncommon for people to just ignore it. You didn't have you didn't have payroll withholding and all of this kind of stuff. It was all still a very small thing that was
Yep.
intended to pay off some more debts. Um,
Yep.
and so the fact that he was not paying his income tax was really not that unusual of a thing.
No. No, and that's all that they could basically nail him on. Flimsy as hell.
Yeah.
Even though looking at the history of it, he ordered about 500 hits, they estimate.
Wow. Holy shit.
Yeah. And about 1,000 died in the wars that his gang was involved in. So,
So that's what your morality buys you. A
hmm
thousand, at least 1,000 deaths just from Capone,
just in Chicago
just in
with all that.
Chicago.
We're not even talking about the New York wars
Right.
with all that. I mean, it's incredible when you look at the scope of it. And utterly amazing. But man, I am almost wondering if we shouldn't do Bugsy Siegel on his own show with that
Well,
whole
how do you not?
mystery. Yeah,
That's a
with
whole
the
story on it in itself. I guess we're gonna have a part three.
yeah, we could do that next week, and then what we had planned for next week, the week after.
Yeah, absolutely.
This Bugsy Siegel, for those of you who don't know, there is a murder mystery surrounding his death.
Dun dun dun.
Yep.
And
I think.
the huge gamble that he took on Las Vegas.
Yep.
I mean, he staked his life on that, literally.
Ever since researching him for this one, I've had the Snoop Dogg lyrics stuck in my head. Like Bugsy Siegel, do it all legal.
Right.
So, yeah, we will be looking at that. Man, there's just so much information with this stuff, too.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't even mentioned. I mean, you mentioned Dillinger just in passing.
Yeah, Dutch Schultz, too,
Yeah, so
just in
many
passing.
guys
Which the Biograph Theater, which we had the picture of there, is where Dillinger was shot and killed.
betrayed by his girlfriend.
Yep, I have been there
Have you?
a couple of times. Yep, up there on the Chicago-Indiana line, which that is where Dillinger, most of his crimes occurred, was Chicago and Indiana. So, the other Public Enemy #1.
Right.
Yeah, if people want an interesting film to watch that gets into this and all the hysteria that was created after the St. Valentine's Day massacre, look up the 1931 version of Scarface
Oh yeah.
with Paul Mooney as the gangster in it. It's directed by Howard Hawks, who did Bringing Up Baby and The Big Sleep, among others.
The Pacino Scarface really just has that one name. It's so little to do with you know Capone. Really, I thought.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, they just basically stole it
Yeah.
with that whole narrative. I mean, De Palma's a great filmmaker, but yeah, I like the 1931 version much better myself. So that was also pre-code before they had the Hays Code.
Ah, always a
So,
good thing.
yep, little more violence than you might expect in a 1930s movie.
Yeah. All
Yep.
right. Well, let's call it a night. Everybody, stay safe.
Please do.
Use your hand
Stay healthy.
sanitizer. Stay away from people. People are bad for you right now.
Wash your damn hands.
Wash your wash your damn hands. Yep.
uh, yep. Stay healthy, people.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.